You are crouching in the elephant grass of the Ia Drang Valley, and the helicopters are already leaving. The rotor wash throws dust into your eyes. Your rifle feels heavier than it should. Behind you, the landing zone is just a small clearing in the central highlands of Vietnam, surrounded by trees, hills, and shadows that seem to move whenever you stop looking at them. Then the first shots crack from the jungle. You do not know it yet, but you are standing inside the battle that will change how America fights in Vietnam. The place is called Landing Zone X-Ray. The date is November 14th, 1965. The unit landing here is the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, part of the new 1st Cavalry Division, an airmobile division built around helicopters. Airmobile means soldiers are not only marching by road or moving in trucks, they are being carried directly into the battlefield by aircraft, dropped into remote places that once seemed impossible to reach quickly. To American commanders, this looks like the future. The jungle may be thick, the mountains may be steep, the roads may be dangerous or non-existent. But helicopters can fly over all of it. What happens when technology appears to erase distance? For the United States in 1965, that question was not theoretical. It was the heart of the war. Earlier that year, American combat troops had begun arriving in large numbers. The war was no longer only a conflict of advisors, training missions, and South Vietnamese forces fighting with American support. Now, U.S. soldiers were entering the jungle themselves, and they were searching for a way to fight an enemy that did not always stand still, did not always defend cities, and did not always appear where American maps expected him to be. In the Central Highlands, near the Cambodian border, that enemy was not simply a loose guerrilla band. It was the North Vietnamese Army, also called the NVA, the Regular Army of North Vietnam. The men facing the Americans near Ia Drang were disciplined, organized, and experienced. They could move through difficult terrain. They could use the cover of jungle and mountain. They could mass forces near the border, strike, and disappear before American power could fully close around them. The United States wanted to force them into battle. The North Vietnamese wanted to learn how the Americans fought. Ia Drang became the place where both sides got their answer. The battle grew out of fighting around the Plei Special Forces camp in October 1965. After North Vietnamese units attacked the camp and then pulled back toward the Chu Pong Massif, American commanders believed they had a chance to pursue them. The 1st Cavalry Division was sent into the area. This was exactly what the new division had been created to do: find the enemy, fly soldiers into position, use artillery and aircraft to support them, move faster than the enemy could react. The idea was simple, but the battlefield was not simple. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Moore, the commander of the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, led his men into Liz X-Ray by helicopter. Years later, Moore and journalist Joseph Galloway would describe the battle in We Were Soldiers Once, and Young, one of the most important eyewitness accounts of Ia Drang. Their story would become famous, but the men landing that morning had no idea they were entering a battle that would be studied for decades. They only knew the helicopters were coming in waves. That detail mattered. The landing zone was small, but the helicopters could not bring the entire battalion in at once. One group landed, then the helicopters lifted away. Another group came in, then another. For a dangerous period of time, the Americans on the ground were not yet a complete force. They were fragments of a battalion arriving in pieces. What happens when a modern army can move faster than its own safety can keep up? The answer came quickly. North Vietnamese soldiers were much closer than expected. The quiet clearing erupted. Gunfire came from the trees. Mortars began to fall. American soldiers tried to organize a defensive perimeter, while more men were still in the air, still waiting to land, still far away from the fight they were already part of. The first lesson of Ia Drang was brutal. Helicopters could deliver troops with astonishing speed. But once the helicopters left, the soldiers were still alone on the ground. Air mobility could create contact. It could not control what happened after contact began. At LZ X-Ray, the Americans survived because they had another advantage: firepower. Artillery batteries were positioned to support them. Helicopter gunships attacked enemy positions. Tactical aircraft struck the surrounding area. Air Force bombers would later be used in the wider battle zone. The American method began to take shape in real time. Find the enemy. Fix the enemy in place. Bring overwhelming firepower onto the enemy. Measure success by the damage inflicted. This approach would become deeply connected to the phrase search and destroy, a method in which American units moved into contested areas to locate enemy forces, engage them, and destroy as much of their strength as possible. On paper, it made sense. In the jungle, it became far more complicated. The North Vietnamese commanders also learned quickly. They understood that American firepower was deadliest at a distance. If they stayed far away, artillery and airstrikes could tear them apart. So they tried to fight close, very close. Some American accounts describe this as the enemy grabbing the Americans by the belt. The meaning was simple. If North Vietnamese soldiers stayed close enough to U.S. positions, American artillery and aircraft became harder to use without risking American lives. That idea turned Ia Drang into more than a battle. It became a collision between two different ways of war. The United States used speed, helicopters, radios, artillery, and aircraft. The North Vietnamese used terrain, endurance, concealment, and closeness. One side tried to use distance as a weapon. The other tried to destroy distance before that weapon could work. What kind of war is it when the most powerful tools become dangerous if the enemy gets too close? For 3 days, Lizzie X-ray became the answer. The Americans held their perimeter under repeated attacks. Some units were cut off. One platoon became isolated and surrounded. Ammunition ran low. Wounded men waited for evacuation. Helicopters tried to land in a clearing that was under fire. Every landing mattered. Every takeoff mattered. The same helicopters that had brought the soldiers into the valley now had to keep them alive. One of the most remembered figures of Ia Drang was Major Bruce Crandall, a helicopter pilot who repeatedly flew into Ulzi X-ray under enemy fire. His later Medal of Honor citation described his actions on November 14, 1965, at Landing Zone X-ray, where he helped bring in ammunition and evacuate wounded soldiers when the landing zone was under intense attack. But the deeper lesson was larger than individual courage. Helicopters were no longer only transportation, they were lifelines. Without them, an air-mobile unit could be trapped. With them, it might survive. That belief shaped the rest of the war. But Ia Drang did not end at X-ray. After the fighting there, the battle moved toward another clearing, Landing Zone Albany. If X-ray showed how helicopters and firepower could help a surrounded force survive, Albany showed how quickly the jungle could erase that advantage. On November 17th, American troops moving toward LZ Albany were hit by a sudden ambush. The column was stretched out. The terrain was close. Soldiers became separated. Communication broke down. Units lost contact with one another in the confusion. The battle became intimate. It became fragmented. It became terrifying. From the air, Vietnam looked like a problem of movement. On the ground, it was a problem of visibility, confusion, fear, and terrain. A helicopter could fly over the jungle, but a soldier still had to walk through it. That was the second lesson of Ia Drang. Technology could change how America entered battle. It could not remove the jungle from the battle. It could not make every enemy visible. It could not prevent an ambush once men were already inside it. After Ia Drang, both sides studied what had happened. American commanders saw proof that air mobility worked. They saw that troops could be flown into remote terrain. They saw that firepower could prevent a disaster from becoming total destruction. They saw high North Vietnamese casualties as evidence that the enemy could be worn down if he could be found and forced to fight. This strengthened the American belief in search and destroy. But the North Vietnamese studied the same battle and saw a different lesson. They saw that American units depended on landing zones. They saw that helicopters had limits. They saw that artillery and air support were terrifying, but not magical. They saw that if they could get close, stay hidden, choose the time of contact, and endure terrible punishment, they could still hurt the most powerful military force in the world. So Ia Drang did not create one lesson. It created two opposite lessons. America believed it had found a way to fight the war. North Vietnam believed it had found a way to survive that way of fighting. That contradiction would shape years of bloodshed. The United States would send more helicopters, more patrols, more search and destroy missions, more soldiers into remote landing zones. More firepower onto suspected enemy positions. More reports that measured success in enemy body counts. The North Vietnamese and their allies would continue adapting. They would avoid battle when it did not suit them. They would close distance when American firepower became too dangerous. They would use terrain, timing, and patience to turn American strengths into problems. Ia Drang mattered because it created confidence, and confidence can be dangerous. It convinced many American commanders that mobility and firepower could solve the tactical problem of Vietnam. If the enemy could be found, he could be fixed. If he could be fixed, he could be destroyed. If enough enemy soldiers were destroyed, victory would eventually follow. But what if the enemy did not need to win every battle? What if he only needed to survive them? What if the measure of success was not who controlled the landing zone at sunset, but who could keep fighting month after month, year after year, until the stronger power became exhausted? That was the question Ia Drang left behind. It was not obvious in the smoke and noise of 1965. It became clearer later. The battle showed American power at its most dramatic. Helicopters cutting through the sky, artillery firing from distant positions, pilots landing under fire, soldiers holding a perimeter against repeated attacks, commanders moving men across terrain that once would have taken days to cross. But it also showed the limits of that power. It showed that speed could lead soldiers into danger faster than commanders could understand the danger. It showed that firepower could save lives without solving the political and strategic problem underneath the battle. It showed that victory in a clearing did not mean control of the country around it. This is why Ia Drang changed how America fought in Vietnam. It helped define the war as a contest of mobility, firepower, attrition, and body counts. It made the helicopter one of the symbols of the conflict. It gave commanders a model they would return to again and again, but it also gave the enemy a model. Get close, choose the ground, endure the fire, survive the battle, return again. The men at LZ X-Ray and LZ Albany were not thinking in grand historical terms. They were thinking about ammunition, water, wounded friends, radio calls, tree lines, and the next burst of gunfire. For them, Ia Drang was not a doctrine. It was a place where the jungle closed in and survival became immediate. Yet history often turns on places like that. A small clearing, a helicopter landing, a unit arriving in pieces, a battle that seems tactical in the moment but becomes strategic in memory. The Battle of Ia Drang did not decide the Vietnam War, but it revealed the shape of the war to come. A war where America could arrive from the sky and still be surrounded on the ground. A war where firepower could win a fight and still fail to control the land. A war where both sides could leave the same battlefield convinced they had learned how to win. And in the central Highlands, as the helicopters disappeared above the elephant grass, the soldiers below were discovering something far larger than one landing zone. They were discovering that winning a battle is not the same as understanding a war. You are crouching in the elephant grass of the Ia Drang Valley, and the helicopters are already leaving. Only now, you understand what they are carrying away with them. The illusion that a new way to fight could solve an old and stubborn war.